Well, I want to welcome you guys. Thank you for, one, coming all the way to Vegas. How many of you guys have been to a Tableau conference before? How many of you here were in Vegas last time? And how many of you were here the first time you were in Vegas? Hey, got a couple. That's more than I was expecting. That's awesome. Welcome, guys, back for round 3 of Tableau in Vegas. My name is Blake Pustai. I am a QA engineer at Tableau. I've been here, 7th anniversary is next week. And I've held a number of hats, as we've grown from program management, product management, support, now doing the QA thing. And this is my co-host, Kevin. He's a sales consultant. He and I go way back to support days. So I think between the two of us, we've got about almost 15 years of experience at Tableau. Mostly doing server and enterprise level stuff.
Don't oversell us.
Don't oversell us?
Don't
okay.
oversell us.
That makes it sound like we're geniuses. Okay. So anyway, let me move forward. Welcome to 10 things every admin should know. We're going to have a lot of fun today. We talked about, you saw in the intro in the app, total Buzzfeed-style, nothing but best practices. And that's exactly what I want you to take away. Our objective here is for you guys to take something back to the office on Monday that you can use to level up your admin game. And if you don't, everything you see here is stuff you're already doing, then we really want you to feel affirmed that you're doing all the right things. All of the content that we are going to share today are practices that we sourced from admins in the field. So this isn't stuff that Kevin and I just made up. This is, I reached out to folks like, we got Rob Yeager sitting here up in the front from Sprint. You can already see I've got Mark Jackson from Piedmont, Dan Montgomery from a company that I can't actually name by name, but you all get the point. And folks from Alpo and various others. So we also want to have fun, so we're going to keep things nice and light. Agenda slides, obligatory, Q&A, and we want to put on your thinking caps. If we have enough time at the end, we would like to open it up for maybe a story or two. If you guys have best practices or little anecdotes about times where you've either created a best practice yourself or implemented something that we haven't talked about today and you want to share it, feel free to let us know, and like I said, time permitting, just giving you that heads up. Anyway, that's enough of my little bit here. I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who's going to go and start off, and then I'll share some halfway through. Kevin, go ahead.
If I can have that?
Yeah, I think so. I can trust you.
Oh, all right. So it's story time. Again, we've got 10 practices to tell you about. We're going to be kind of relating those with stories and anecdotes. Hopefully you'll find something you like that you can go back home come Monday and say, you know what, this is something that we should be doing. Now, legal says that I have to tell you that each of these stories is true, but names have been changed to protect the innocent. Of course, that's also nonsense, and this is a joke, so that's okay. All right. So first, though, let's talk about trolls. Not internet trolls, but like bridge trolls, right? You're out adventuring, you're walking across a bridge, you're talking about where you're going to be camping tonight, and there's a troll under the bridge. Now they know where you're going to be sleeping. All right, maybe let's talk a little bit more realistic. A lot of us here grew up in a home where you had the one phone and everybody had to share it. And there you are talking to your boyfriend or your girlfriend, and your pesky little sister or your little brother picks up, and now your plan to sneak out and meet up, it's ruined, right? Drats. So what am I really talking about here? None of us want to have our secrets heard by others that shouldn't hear them. And so how do we do that with Tableau Server? How do we make sure that there's someone not listening in the middle and hearing what we're saying when we don't want them to? And that's going to be SSL. So always secure traffic to your Tableau Server gateway or load balancer with SSL. An SSL certificate is going to establish trust between your server and your users. It's that simple. It's going to prevent data leaks, and it's that secret code that you can speak with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or in this case, your users, so that your little brother doesn't ruin your plans. Pretty simple. And like Blake said, we're going to keep this light. So you'll notice that we've got a couple links in here to learn more. So again, we're not going to go too in-depth today. This presentation will be available to you online at the conference site. You can download this. You'll be able to get into that. But I even just dive into our documentation on our website. All of this will be there. All right. So if you're part of an organization that values data security at all, as in person A should report B, but person C shouldn't see that at all. You know that permissions become part of your daily life as an administrator. So take, for example, this very real customer scenario. They had hundreds and hundreds of users, thousands of workbooks, and a very active user base publishing workbooks every single day. Now, how could they possibly manage all those individual work permissions? That sounds like a real serious chore, right? I mean, nobody has time to go in there and look at your hundreds of different workbooks and figure out, okay, should Rob see this? Should Noah see this? Okay. Thing is, there's a real simple solution for it. And it's called project level permissions. So if you're a Tableau Server administrator and you're dealing with a whole lot of content that you're trying to manage your permissions from the top down. Use projects. Don't permission at the workbook level. Permission your projects and then assign groups to that project. So then you're not even managing individual users, but instead you're saying, okay, this group is our Western sales region. We're going to give them permissions to our Western sales region project. And then that way, all the workbooks in there are going to conform to your security needs. That's your data governance policy imposed in Tableau. And it's going to prevent accidental creation of backdoors into content that users shouldn't see. Because if you're permissioning at the workbook level, and then you're also permissioning at the project level, you might not know whether or not Blake here is seeing content I don't want Blake to see. But if I make sure that Blake is at the project level, then Blake, again, isn't listening to my secrets. Now let's take that up one level. Let's step that up. So what happens when our customer has multiple teams to manage, and each with their own unique requirements? Maybe you have an HR department that wants to do compensation analysis. Maybe you're in healthcare and you want to make sure that your protected data and your business data are in two separate places. How do we do that in Tableau? Really simple. It's not another chore. We're going to use sites. But only use sites for true user segregation. So if multiple teams are on your server, so if I have HR on one hand and I have sales and I have the operations, I can create individual sites. No content can traverse sites. Only users can traverse sites. So a user can be a member of multiple sites. Maybe I have an executive who wants to see into every site. We can do that. However, if I want to make sure that only HR can access HR data in HR's site, I can create that site and make sure that no path will ever cross over. No one from sales is going to be able to look at other people's comp analysis or anything like that. They're going to be secure in each of their own sites. All right. So we've talked about projects. We've talked about sites. Let's talk a little bit about scale. So there was a problem of the insanity of trying to manage access to content for 20,000 users. Now, you can really get quickly bogged down. Even with projects and sites and groups and all of those permissions, it's really easy to get bogged down in trying to manage access to the content. You don't want to be the sole gatekeeper. You're trying to empower your users to have that self-service, but still follow your data governance policy, still make sure that only the people that need to see things should be seeing things. Because you want to free up your time to be able to do fun stuff in Tableau, right? You don't want to be bogged down with user access requests. And so really simply, how do we take and leverage the power of projects, groups, sites, and our permissions model to make this easier for you? You can sync with an identity store. So if your company has an Active Directory group management tool, and I'd imagine most of you do, you can manage your users in those groups and just simply have Tableau Server sync the groups. Just make it part of your process. You can also take that a step further. You might notice that under Learn More, there's a link there that says Automated Tableau Group Management with XSOL, Python, and the REST API. Now, there's a whole lot of words in there that I'm not even sure I remember the meaning to right now. However, let's say that you don't want to use Active Directory. Maybe you have OpenID Connect. Maybe you have some other kind of user store, or LDAP, or Open Directory. Using our REST API, you can accomplish the same thing that we're talking about with Active Directory to automate your identity management so that as employees join your company or leave your company or change roles, we'll be able to sync that with however it is you manage identity at your company. Cool. So this story is pretty good. So I'm actually going to read this verbatim. So my apologies, I'm not going to put any flair in this. But this came from one of our Zen masters, and I just found this kind of amusing. So he says, this solved the drinking problem developed from all the monotonous work related to placing lineage comments in each of my self-service data sources. 5 weeks of manual work for 2 data sources, about 500 fields. Was fully automated to download the Tableau data source fields, update the XML with the lineage and definition data, then republish to the server. So what has happened now is I can update 24 self-services with around 15,000 fields in a couple minutes with the click of a button. Moral of the story, drink responsibly for socialization instead of using alcohol to cope with sucky work. So what are we talking about? We're talking about working smarter and not harder. And as a Tableau Server admin, there is a great set of tools you can learn to use. And so a lot of what he said there, some of us were probably not having to deal with lineage and metadata management. However, the moral of the story is using the REST API. The REST API is a robust API that allows every administrative function in Tableau Server to be automated via either script or Python, or maybe you're integrating Tableau into a product that you're providing your customers. You can control all of Tableau through our REST API. And just as an aside, we have additional APIs as well. We have a document API, we have a JavaScript API. Those are things that can change the entire game. So if you want to automate Tableau, you want to make your life easier as an administrator, you want to pull out Python or whatever scripting tools you may want to use, check out the REST API. And unfortunately, the princess is in another castle. What do I mean by that? If you want to learn more about the REST API, we have a great session coming up. It's called 8 Server Admin Life Changers. Number 6 will shock you. It's going to go in depth about the REST API and give you a lot of knowledge about that. A lot of tools and arm you to be prepared. And then now we have Blake.
Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And Mike.
Yeah, Mike would be good.
There we go.
All right, I'm going to step down here. All right.
So thank you very much, Kevin. Now, a lot of Kevin's top tips and tricks and all that were about more on the content side. Now I'm going to dive deeper into the sysadmin duties that I think a lot of us know and love and maybe not quite love sometimes. So let me tell you a story here. This one is about recovery. And this comes from a customer that I met a number of years ago. Once upon a time, they were a relatively new admin with a months-old Tableau deployment. It was growing like fire. New users coming in all the time, especially more and more content being published. Users were publishing multiple versions of everything. All was well until one day they came into the office and had a whole slew of emails from all of his users, pretty much all of these users, with the same problem. Nobody could log in. Nobody likes to hear that, right? You're P1, your cluster's down. What do? Well, deal with the adrenaline, dive in, you start trying to figure it out. Well, you go in and found out after about a day and a half of calling support, I was the guy on the other line working it through with him. And we ended up figuring out that this is way back when spindles and actual physical hard disks were a thing. Hard disk had gone bad and was reading and writing data incorrectly in a few places. And this obviously meant, in this particular scenario, you couldn't go and read the passwords and the credential data effectively. So that's super lame, right? I mean, who's ever had a hard drive go bad at a really bad time and taken an app down? No? Okay, I'm surprised. When I was in support, we got those calls all the time. But in this particular scenario, I asked him, things actually got worse. I asked him, well, do you have a backup? Because we can just restore this. He kind of sheepishly said, no. Oh, okay, well, then I had to give him the bad news that really the only option at that point was to go and rebuild the cluster from the ground up. And it took us about a week to go and get a new system, provision all the new hardware, get all the users and groups and all that stuff and import it into the system. Then another several days of working with these users, trying to beg and plead and buying lots of donuts and coffee and rounded drinks at the happy hour. And eventually, after about a week, their system was back up and running. And then immediately after that, he took a backup and all that. So what's the moral of the story? Take backups right away. Automate them if you can. You don't ever want to get stuck without one. You can do everything from a PowerShell script that downloads the backup and uploads it to S3. You can store it off in some other cloud provider, network service. Basically, the most important thing, aside from generating the backup, is storing it somewhere not that server, right? Because how much, let me back up a minute here. Taking the backup isn't very helpful if it's on the same drive that's about to die, right? Like you can't, that's not going to help you. You're going to end up in the exact same boat as you were before, so get it off the box. And then the other most important part, and this is something that is often forgotten, is that having the backup doesn't help you if for some reason that backup is corrupted. So you got to make sure the additional step is, how many of you guys have test systems? Many of you guys? Yeah? Every once in a while, go through and take those backups and restore them to your test system to make sure they're actually healthy. That way, if there's a problem with that backup, you can go and start troubleshooting it on your production system, get your backups healthy again before you have a problem and wish you had it. And as you can see, we've got links to plenty of content about how to do that. And in this particular scenario, as you can see right there, if he'd had a backup, he would have been back up and running within a couple of days, as opposed to taking a whole week, and it would have been much less stressful. And the next one. So I've got the next three practices here that we're going to talk about are all based on the same story because it does a fantastic job of illustrating the points. This is one that I actually heard from Rob sitting up front. And in this situation, this is way back when, starting in Tableau Server 5.2, I believe, right, Rob? Right around even maybe was it before public shipped? Before we launched public or right after? Yeah, right before we launched Tableau Public. So back then, I mean, Tableau Server, the admin experience wasn't nearly as robust as it is today. So it took a lot of cowboy work to get the enterprise level deployment going. So Rob at the time had a small single box with a Pentium processor under his desk, and at the time, a very large 200 gigabyte hard drive. This is back in, I think, 2010. Well, as the deployment grew, what happens? Well, users grow, you get more users, and they like to publish. Tableau is a content creating machine. Where does that content go? It goes to the hard disk. Well, disk filled up. And what happens, how many of you guys have had a problem with Tableau Server when disk fills up? Anybody experienced that? What happens? Does the server get happy? Does it like it? No, it totally doesn't. Well, if Rob hadn't been paying attention and monitoring the hard disk, server could have died. It would have gone down, it would have been a big problem. And back then, server really didn't handle disk exhaustion situations very well and could have gone very poorly. So the moral of the story, let me move forward here. Apologies. Monitor your disk. You can use a bunch of different tools. There are tools built into Windows. I think there's some open source stuff. Zabbix can do it. You can plug all sorts of things in. But Tableau Server, as of I think it was somewhere in the 9 time frame, introduced our own built-in hard disk usage monitoring. And Tableau Server will automatically monitor the space usage on all the drives that Tableau Server cares about. So, and throughout your cluster. And we log that data, it goes into the database, we give you admin views, we will alert you. And if you're already in tab config, it only takes a couple of seconds to click a button and you're ready to go. You're off to the races. So the other piece here is you want to make sure not only are you monitoring disk usage, but you want to try to keep that disk usage in check. And one of the ways you can do that is by running tabadmin cleanup every once in a while. And tabadmin cleanup will go and manage your log file growth. It can clean up if you happen to have a growth in temp file usage, it can clean those guys up for you and really help keep that usage under control. In fact, a couple months ago on my team, I'm on the sustained QA team, so we're in charge of verifying all the maintenance releases whenever they come out. A couple of our test systems were having hard disk problems, and we took at it, and sure enough, tabadmin cleanup hadn't been run in probably about a quarter, and the disk was not in a happy state. And the why, I mean, that's kind of self-evident, right? You want to keep your disk in check, and you want to know when something's going to go wrong before it actually happens. Let's go. Next one, Act 2. So now that their disk is filled up, how do you think they solved the problem long term? Well, they outgrew it, and they needed to go and migrate to a much larger, proper IT-supported deployment. Well, you've got all this content. You're not going to want to go. Rob was telling me that they didn't want to go and migrate all the content, because again, content creating machine. You only want to migrate the content that's relevant. So how do they figure that out? Well, they connected to the repository database. At the time, went in, there were some unsupported ways to get access to the database, built an admin view and queried it, figured out exactly which of their workbooks, which of their data sources were hadn't been touched in 6 months. So went through, built that list, emailed the content owners and sanity checking, and then asked them, and they went through and then deleted the content. They took it back up, I imagine, then moved it over and restored it to the new system, and everything got up and running. So this process worked so well that they not only did it once, they did it multiple times. At the beginning, it was manual, but over time, manual doesn't scale with your deployment. And as I'm sure Rob can tell you, since then they've gone from what was it, an 8-core box to 100 and something? 104 core, yeah. So it's a very small 104 core deployment. That doesn't work, especially not as the number of users on Tableau Server grows. So the solution there is they automated it. So now today, they automated it back in 2011. The same script now goes through using tab command, hits that dashboard, downloads a CSV file of all the workbooks that are less than, that haven't been touched in 6 months. Then PowerShell iterates over all the items in that list and deletes them. So way back when this all started, they probably only delete a handful of workbooks every month. And then now it's about 50 to 100 stale workbooks are getting trimmed a week, which has been really helpful for them, not only keeping the stale content out, but the other benefit is that once you get rid of the stale content, that actually makes it a whole lot easier for your users to find the content that's relevant for them. Get rid of a lot of the noise and boost their ability to make their decisions quickly. I know that sometimes on our systems at Tableau and some of the internal ones that the dev team uses, it can take us a little while to find some of our content because we're all publishing test workbooks and whatnot. So moving on. Now that they've figured out the database, question? Oh, awesome. I was going to suggest that. Thank you very much. Now that they've accessed the database, they've built this custom admin view. Well, the next logical step, they figured out, oh my gosh, there's some awesome stuff here. Next step, oh, hang on. I skipped a slide. I got way ahead of myself. Moral of the story, give it a shelf life, prune it regularly, create custom admin views with the PostgreSQL database to answer the question, what content hasn't been used, automate it, set it, forget it. I already mentioned the why, super useful, blah, 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 there we go. Okay. The one about data mining. So next step here, like I said, they've already found the database. There's a whole lot of useful information there. Well, naturally, we're curious, right? We all love data, we love Tableau. Jump in and started using Tableau to answer a whole bunch of other questions throughout their business. They discovered that there was all sorts of information there about performance, user activity. You could start going and tying things like which users have published workbooks that are operating slowly, which of your users are publishing the workbooks that are getting the most traffic, so on and so forth. There's a lot of great information there to help you identify how your users are using your system. It will help you identify when something goes wrong, what the problem is. So you're spending your time investigating in the right area. And this whole process, you'll see the links here. There we go. We've got a data dictionary that we recently published back in Tableau, I think 9, was it 9 something, 8 something? I don't remember, this is one of my features. No, it was before 9, it was in the 8, it was like, I think 825, I think was it? Somewhere in there.
It was around then.
Yeah. I know, I was going to say, it was my feature, but that was a number of years ago. I don't quite remember. But the point being that at Tableau, as you've already seen at conference, and you've been around a while, we listen to our users. And we know that auditing and being able to get into the database and answer your own questions, because our built-in admin views are great, but they don't answer all the questions that you're going to need to monitor your deployment. And it is an extremely common practice to go and build custom admin views to dive in and answer whatever questions your business has. In fact, on the previous slide in practice 8, I linked to a blog post by Mark Jackson that did a few years ago about custom admin views, and I think he even had the TWIB in there for one that he built. It was absolutely fantastic. So that's it. Knowledge is power. Get to know the work, get to know the database, dive in, explore, have fun, be like Rob and Dan and Mark and many of the other admins I'm sure in this room who dive in and do those things every day. All right, there we go. And this last one comes from another really large customer that I spoke with recently, and this is also a practice that is very common, and I think we even have it in some of our documentation. But in their scenario, everything was going fine with their deployment. It was a smaller box. I think they only had 8 cores at the time. Until one day, they got that one question that I'm sure all of you guys really love to hear from their customers. why is everything so slow? Well, turns out Tableau Server is only as fast as the hardware resources that it's running on, right? Shocker. In their particular scenario, they had outgrown their single box. They were seeing Viz runtimes running slowly, their subscriptions were taking forever to run, extracts were taking forever to refresh. They had exhausted the capacity of their server, which is something that is going to happen to pretty much every successful deployment around. You're going to exhaust the box. So what did they do? They bought another 8 cores, added another node, and they put all their backgrounders on that box, made it backgrounder dedicated. Because they were only running backgrounders, they went up to 8 cores. Sorry, they added 8 backgrounders instead of 4. And what did this do for them? It went through and dramatically dropped their extract refresh times. Subscriptions started running on time. Viz loading got faster because now that's happening on another box. And they were able to go and really increase the capacity of their cluster, and their users were much happier. So the moral of the story, dedicate proper hardware resources required by your users or required by your use cases. The other piece is that isolate backgrounders to their own box whenever you can. It's going to do a lot of things for you as far as I've already talked about, speed, performance, efficiency. But the other thing that it does is it makes your troubleshooting job easier. If users are complaining about viz load times, you know that backgrounders have nothing to do with it, and you can focus on the other box, right? Helps bifurcate the problem. And again, you know the drill. One more, when you get this guy, pull it down, dive into all the content. There's a lot of great stuff there. And last one, the one weird trick, right? No BuzzFeed article would be fine without a weird trick somewhere in the middle there. Now this one is a little bit different. So I'm sure we have all been in a situation where we were looking for a weird trick to solve a whole bunch of problems. This one, this also came from Rob. I keep referencing Rob because he gave me some great stuff. But they recently went through a process to migrate all of their analytics data from one high-performance database to another to save some money and various other good reasons. Well, the problem with that is that they've got 20,000 plus workbooks and multiple thousands of published data sources. Well, if you're moving from one database to the other, and you've got all that content that's pointing at the old one, obviously going to ask your users to go and download the content and edit it and point to the database, make whatever changes they've got to do in the old one, is a total non-starter. And the alternative, I imagine, at that point is to go and keep the old database up and running as users slowly migrate over, and that's just a headache, right? Because then users don't know where to look. Well, Rob's team went and ended up looking outside their own immediate Tableau Server admin space. They involved an expert outside their team. They went and found their DBA and started involving their DBA in the process. Well, they figured out that they could go through and replicate the database structure in the new database that they had in the old one, migrate all the content over, so the data definition was all exactly the same. And then they went in and using some of the APIs, were able to go through and edit all of their workbooks and repoint them to the new database. Nobody was the wiser. It was a seamless transition, and everybody moved over to the new DB. Well, the next problem there is that in the new database, they went from sub 3-second response times to queries on the old DB to somewhere between 30 to 40-second response times on the new one. That sucks. That's terribly disappointing. I would be super bummed if that happened to me. Well, again, the DBA came to the rescue. Dived in, took a look at the logs, analyzed Tableau Server, their users' usage patterns, looked at the queries, and were able to figure out ways to optimize the database through some indexing and some other activities to go and optimize it, and they were able to get their performance back down to sub 3 seconds. So what's the moral of the story? None of us are an island. We've all got a lot of knowledge. We're brilliant people. We can solve brilliant problems, but there are limits to our understanding. There are limits to the abilities of folks within our teams. So to be an absolutely successful Tableau Server admin, in general, if you want to be a great colleague, start leveraging folks outside your team. Get to know your DBA, especially in Tableau scenarios. Your DBA can be a lifesaver for you. And leveraging that other knowledge allows you to solve problems that you wouldn't be able to otherwise and be able to solve them much more effectively. And in this same thing, what was my last point there? Oh yeah, empowering your content creators. That's another piece of this leveraging knowledge outside and enabling you to find the users who may not know what they're doing the best with Tableau Server. So you can take those guys and send them to training with Tableau Server, with Tableau, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, first time, morning, coffee, anyway. Get them to training, make them more effective and more responsible users. There we go, yes. So wrapping right up. What did we cover? We covered a whole bunch of fun stuff. I hope you guys had a good time this morning so far. We've covered using SSL. We've covered project level permissions. We've covered using sites for user segregation, syncing users with your identity store, so on and so forth, and its importance of backups, and then being great teammates and leveraging that knowledge outside. So at this point, I want to point you guys, before we move to Q&A, the supplemental content is an amazing resource for all of you, especially folks who are newer. If you came to Kevin and I's talk last year that was about basically all of Server in one session, this is a very similar slide because all the content is amazing. Start there at that Tableau Server's Everybody's Install Guide, probably one of the best pieces of documentation that our docs team is published in recent memory. It goes through everything from start to finish, from new Tableau Server to like basically Zen Master level. It's amazing. So keep going with it, dive into the community. Speaking of community, Mark was letting us know that I think it's Wednesday at 4? Wednesday from 3 to 4 p.m. It's in the app. Do you know which room? Is it this room? Oh, okay. Over the Four Seasons, there's going to be a Tableau Server admin meetup, the user group. And that'd be another great opportunity to network, get to know some more folks, ask some more questions. I think in the past, when I've helped organize that meetup, there's program managers and product managers there from Tableau, and even some of the devs to talk with and answer some of your questions and, again, level up your game. All right, and moving on, related sessions. Wanted to plug some of these guys again because there's great content that keeps going from what we've talked about today. You've got the one that we talked about earlier that's all about the REST API. We've got running Server as a service. That's later today. And then tomorrow, there's the deployment tips for Server. That's with Alan Dorhofer and Nilesh Kamkukar. Alan is our director of Server and Cloud platform, and Nilesh is one of our senior product managers. They've done talks before, and it's always fantastic. And then, if you want to come back again and see Kevin and I, you can do that tomorrow afternoon. I think we're somewhere in one of these rooms on this level before. All right, moving on. We got about, we did good. We got about half an hour for questions and stories and so forth. So
I know we powered through a whole lot of stuff. The idea here was to, again, give you kind of some action items, 10 takeaways. We wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, so that was intentional. So if any of the points that we talked about, if you need clarification, feel free to ask us just what the heck we're talking about. I understand that we kind of moved at a breakneck pace occasionally. And some of the concepts, if you're new to Tableau Server, you might be like, what are they even talking about? Tableau Server database. That's our backend repository that holds your user permissions, history tables, logging, auditing purposes, things like that. So with that being said, we'd like to open this up for questions, or if you need to take off, that's cool too. But what do you want to know? We're going to go with you right here first.
Just a couple of quick questions. When you're taking backup and you want to test the restore, does the restore have to be tested on the exact same cluster configuration, or can you go from like a 3-node cluster to a 1-node cluster?
That's a really good question. So the question was, if I take a backup of my deployment, do I need to test that backup against the same kind of configuration? So if I have a multiple node server in a cluster, can I test that with like a single node? The answer is yes. There's a flag for that. You want to make sure that you do tab-admin restore, the name of your backup file, and really specifically --no-config. And what that will do is it will bring over all of your users, your content, your permissions, everything that makes your server, but it won't bring over the exact configuration of it. It's going to drop all those configuration-specific details. Right. And that's actually a great way. So let's say that you do lose your cluster, maybe your entire data center goes down, and your CEO or your CFO or whoever may be on your shoulder is saying, hey, we need to get Tableau back up and running as fast as possible. And all you've got is a shoebox under your desk like Rob had years ago with that single Pentium. And as long as you've got that backup, maybe it's out in Amazon Cloud or Dropbox, wherever you want to put it, you can restore that without your configuration file. And at least then your users can get to their views and they can get back to analyzing how many.
Exactly, and that's all in our best practices in the docs. When you migrate from one server to the next, you got to use that restore no config. The other thing I want to note is that I think it was in 10.1, 10.2, maybe when you guys can keep me honest about the exact release number, but I don't think it's really relevant, is that we introduced another flag at backup time that I think it's tab-in backup and like -- verify database or something to that effect. And at backup time, and you can even run it independently, it'll go through and verify the database backup that is in the TS back and make sure that it is consistent and is as healthy as we can determine without actually running the restore. So that's another fantastic tool to use.
Yeah, tabadmin is a great, if you're new to Tableau Server, if you're not super familiar with the command line, we have a command line tool called tabadmin. We also have an extras tool called tab command, tab CMD. Tabadmin, as a service administrator, can be your best friend or your worst enemy if you don't know what you're doing. So read up on it and get knowledgeable about it. There's a lot of functions you can script with it, like automating your backups, cleaning up your log files. And so it's a really good tool to use.
Yeah.
So
and actually, at this point, I want to go and invite Rob to come up and join Kevin and I for if you guys have any questions specific to him, since he's the one who lives and breathes this every day. Yeah, go ahead. Mark Jackson. Yeah, in fact, there's another gentleman, Paul Benoob from UBS. He's got a session he's doing here as well. He's, I think his Twitter handle is VizNinja. So if you were to go and Google VizNinja, Tableau Server stuff, you'd find some fantastic blog postings. In fact, I think I even linked to one, maybe on one of Kevin's slides. I don't quite remember.
Pretty sure you did.
Yeah, so another fantastic resource. Also another ZenMaster. And then you, sir, you had a question, so I wanted to get to.
We were talking earlier about cleaning up the outdated content on the server. So if that content is still like refreshing, there's background processes or email things that when you delete the data source or a viz, does it also clear out the background processes with it?
Great question. So the question was, when I'm cleaning up stale content, if I have extract refreshes or subscriptions scheduled against that, when I remove that content, does it also remove those refreshes and subscriptions? The answer is yes, essentially. Now there's a caveat. If you've published the data source separately from the workbook, so for example, if I publish a data source on its own to have multiple users build content off that, you want to be sure that if that data source is no longer needed, to delete the data source as well as the workbook. Because otherwise that data source, they're two independent entities. The workbook is talking to that data source, but that data source is out there being refreshed on a regular schedule. So you want to make sure you remove both. Yeah, that's another good point. If you delete the data source, yeah.
Especially if you have a workbook with multiple data sources in it. So within the Postgres, there's a bunch of HIS tables. I don't know if you've been in and looked at those. I totally recommend it if you can. Go in there. It has logs that keep track of how often a data source is used, how often a view is being used. So if you have a workbook that has a particular data source in it that somebody just attached to the data or to the workbook, you can actually delete it as long as there's no other view that's been using it. So we'll have something like that. It doesn't necessarily break your workbook. It will just disappear out of it. It all depends on how you set up your scripts to delete one or the other.
Cool.
Server set up at different sites for different departments, like you guys recommended earlier. My question is, if we have like a data source that is enterprise-wide that should be used by multiple sites, is there a way that we can universally allow that for different sites, or do I have to do 10 different connections or 10 different?
So the question is, they have multiple sites, but they also have a particular data source that they'd like to share across each of those sites. Is there some way to duplicate that data source without having 10 separate data sources? So if they have 10 sites, they would theoretically have to have 10 duplicates of the same data source. Is there any way to unify that? Yes and no. The bad news is that in your situation is that the way sites are designed, the whole idea is to prevent any data leaks or content crossing those lines. It's meant to be a complete segregated container all on its own. So no, there's no way to have that single, not currently, there's no way to have that one single data source. That's a very, in our experience, somewhat of a unique scenario. Now that being said, if it's a data source that all of your users across your entire system should see, my suggestion would be create a separate site that all of the users have access to. Because if they're all going to be working with that one data source, then you can use your projects to organize content so that you've still got some organization. And of course, coming soon, we've got the sub-projects now. So you can still have a very organized site with projects and sub-projects with that data source in there. And Fun fact about projects, if I don't grant permissions to a project for a set of users or a group, they don't see that it exists at all. So that can be a really useful way of having that single data source or having that single area. In fact, that's something that I encourage people to often do is have a site that's like a free-for-all sandbox. And clean it out once a week. Just let people experiment, explore your data, and have fun with it. Hopefully that kind of... Yeah, no, it's good feedback though. I mean, that's something I can take back now and say, hey, there's a scenario where we should think about maybe a longer term solution for that. Yeah.
Information be like a list of accounts, right, where multiple people use that, finance needs to use that, connect to a different data source.
Understandable, yeah.
The thing I'd want to suggest there is that our contact, I'll go back to that slide. Kevin and I have our contact information available for you, so please, if you guys have, if there's questions here that you want to, there we go. Yeah, if there's questions or other follow-up, and especially in that scenario, this is one of those things where we might want to connect you with one of our product managers to ask more detailed questions.
Well, it'd be nice if you could create, if you could have a set of users and you could have different sites and you could check what box you would want each user to be able to have access to what site.
Site membership. So a user can be either a member of a single site or multiple sites. So you actually do have that capability to assign your users to what sites. Yeah, no, that's actually pretty common. Like at Tableau, we use Tableau extensively at Tableau.
Run the business on it.
Exactly. And so our server is called Alpo because we're dog fooding, we're eating our own product. And so on Alpo, we do have multiple sites. Essentially, we just use them for organization. We're very much an open data company for the most part, aside from like confidential, personal data. And so we'll have like dev and sales and ops, and so we have multiple sites and we can all traverse those. Now, for example, I don't have much reason to look at like operations stuff, but if I was curious or I wanted to look at that kind of thing, I could, which is another good point, is when you're empowering your users, try to break down those silos. When you think about data governance, you have to think about what really makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Does it make sense to share this data with all our users? Should we break down that silo? Or is this something where we want a really tight audience? And there's many good reasons to have a really tight, restricted audience, but I think there's far more reasons to get that many eyes effect and get more of your colleagues looking at more of your company's data. But next question. Oh, right here.
On Tableau Online, there are multiple sites for multiple clients.
Mm-hmm.
There's a cost factor that is admin. So could you get one site, could you use projects, or should you use projects to segregate the content? And is there any risk in that?
And is that like your customer facing? So the question is, on Tableau Online, where you're purchasing a single site, should I use projects to separate content for my external customers? Essentially, it's you're doing Tableau on behalf of your customers, basically. So when you're starting out, for budget reasons, yeah, that makes sense, use projects, but be very, very careful, because if I have Coke as one client and Pepsi as another, never shall the twain meet, right? So, be very careful with your projects. Is it best practice to do that? Not really. Is it sometimes necessary? Oh, absolutely. I understand. I've had many customers who are like, hey, we just don't have the budget to buy a 60-core server, so that's understandable. But in the longer term, if your visualizations, if your dashboards are going to be external customer facing, in the longer term, you should be looking at a solution like Tableau Server in the AWS cloud or Azure cloud. Yeah, for Tableau Online.
That'd be a good conversation with your account rep, but in general, as a best practice, no, you don't want to go and collocate that information. So in online, I would suggest multiple sites. I think that there are some cases where users from one company can see who the other users are. So you wouldn't want somebody from Coke, like Kevin said, you want somebody from Coke to see that Pepsi is seeing some of the same information. Especially because I think you can download work, depending on what your permissions are.
Yeah, in the longer time, you'll probably want to look at Tableau Server. Again, it's a great question for your account manager to help you roadmap where you want to go. If you're looking to stick with Tableau Online, because obviously managed infrastructure is awesome, then yeah, you'll probably want to look at just having multiple sites for your individual customers and then passing that through to them. Cool. Yeah, next question. Oh, right over here. The question is, how, syncing user groups, how do we add the users to the projects? Project-specific user groups. So the trick with that is create your user groups in whatever identity management you're using, most commonly, again, Active Directory. So you want to create your groups there, and then import that group to Tableau. Don't even worry about the users that are in it. Add the group to the project. So rather than individuals, put the project to the group. Well, this might be a, do you have a, so they've got about 2,000 users, and he's wondering how do they efficiently and effectively get all of those users into groups and projects and permissioned. Is there an efficient way to do that?
So, well, full disclosure, we use local authentication on ours. Reason why is because we have full control over it, and we use all project-based permissions. We only have one site and separate everything that way. How we set up for our users to have accounts for whatever projects they're supposed to, we have a couple different groups that we set up. We have what's called an open group. It means once you're part of that organization, that group can get to any project that's within that organization. And then we have dev groups, and then we have external allows. And what our dev groups are is there's people who make the dashboards. They can write to specific folders. And then this external allow is kind of like a bridge. So if you have one that goes from one organization to another, you can use this external allow group that we put in to bridge that gap. Now, as far as automating and putting that in, we've been automated for a long time. So we use tab command. We had to switch to API with 9 for user ads. It was a nice surprise once we upgraded the 9, by the way.
My call, man.
But we'll go away from that. But so we do is we add the ads, and everybody goes in as the open group. So once you're in the server, you have open, and then depending on whichever project you'll get the external allow or you'll get the dev, depending on what's there. We automate parts of it based off of, we query our AD database to know what organization that they're in, but we base it off of their reporting hierarchy and not necessarily a AD user group because those aren't really controlled as much. Multiple AD?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some caveats with domains. If your domains are all in the same forest, that's easy. You can import whatever users from whatever domain you want. If there's separate forests, like totally separated domains, yes, you can add them. It's going to vary very much on your scenario, though, whether you need one-way trust or two-way trust. That's something that if you do have multiple domains that aren't in the same forest, please reach out to your account manager and your sales consulting team, and they can help you figure out what needs to be done. But yes, we can support multiple domains in Tableau Server is the short answer. The longer answer is you might have to tweak a couple things on the AD side. So, cool. All right. All right.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? Oh. That's another good question. So the question was, we have a user who either quit or was terminated. They're going to be removed from that Active Directory group. So what would happen in that scenario is first, they're going to be removed from that group in Tableau Server. They'll be dropped into all users and disabled, so they're no longer able to log in. But we don't automatically delete the user because, who knows, it might have been a mistake. And if they own content, we don't want to delete their content. But do we also then unlicense them from Tableau Desktop? Not currently. Not currently. That's something, we do have some licensing components built into Tableau Server for, that you can opt into. We don't currently de-license via that. However, that is something that is in like the longer term roadmap as far as like our licensing.
There are conversations around, I don't work with the licensing team, but I'm really good friends with the PM who does. I know that we're always looking at ways to streamline the licensing process and address pain points like that.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, no, there's no, his comment was you can use the monitoring tool to see who is using their Tableau desktop licenses, and that helps. But yeah, currently there's no automatic way of unlicensing someone from desktop. That being said, again, that's a great piece of feedback, and we're always looking to make licensing simpler. And we're just kind of getting started with that whole enterprise-wide licensing tool. So that's good things are coming.
Yeah, that's another one of the things. If you've got questions about it, feel free to shoot either us an email, and then I can reach out to.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one
Aruna
slide
is
you want
the
to take a
PM who runs
photo
that.
of,
Yeah.
it's this one. You're welcome to emailing us. I mean, any feedback that you have or features you'd like to see, we'd be happy to take that feedback and kind of carry that forward. I also encourage you to go to our ideas forum out in our Tableau community. So many of our features are customer driven. We had no idea people wanted a desktop for the Mac until they told us and they voted on it. And thanks to Apple, who helped us out with that a lot and probably a lot of those votes, we ended up with a Mac version. So the ideas forum works. We have a long history of we look at them, and if customers say, we want this, we need this, it's something we'll turn around and say, okay, we weren't going to do that yet, but let's go ahead and invest and let's build it. Because ultimately at the end of the day, we're here to help you see and understand data, and we really, really mean it. So yeah, let us know how we can make your lives easier, and we'll try. Oh, over here.
Speaking of which, can I put in a plug for an idea that is relevant? We set up the sites for business divisions within our organization and basically gave them somewhat the autonomy to set up their own user groups. So we have Active Directory structures, but we said if you need to narrow down the groups, use the local groups, right? So a subset of the Active Directory can be publishers or can be senior executives, and then they can manage that way. The only problem with that is that the local group structure that way becomes very onerous. They have to pick and choose names one at a time. So the idea that I was putting out there is smart local groups based upon the characteristics of some user in Tableau or in LDAP or AD. You then automatically put them into a local group.
So his idea is basically kind of a dynamic group where a user, when they're brought into Tableau Server then picks up that user and places them in that group based on certain criteria. Email us that. No, I know we've been looking at different things because people are starting to ask for like dynamic groups and things like that. And so the question now is, just like when we had dynamic parameters, what did Francois say? What does that mean to you? Yeah.
Well, and again, I just want to reiterate, everybody on our PM team, our PMs love talking to customers who want that direct feedback. So seriously, if you've got something here that you want, you've got a user story or a scenario that you want the PM team to specifically think about, the ideas forum is great, especially if you were to go to the ideas forum, drop it in there, articulate the issue, and then say, email me and Kevin, say, hey guys, I made this idea. Can you go and plug it with the PM team? I'm totally happy to go and do that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One question. Is there any trick to delete and hide all user group of the site? Either way, hide it.
So the question was, is there a way to hide the all users group at the site level server? It doesn't really just.
All user group is available in each
Right,
site.
yeah. Is there a way to do that?
Anybody?
I owned the back-end space you installed set up, so the content.
The short answer is no, but.
We don't use all users. We don't use all users at all.
Either use or not is valuable. That's the problem.
Right.
The trouble
So it's
is
not
all
just-
users is a meta group. Like it's the lowest level group because it just literally means all users on the server. And it's necessary for the way our permissions tables work currently. In the future, I mean, I could imagine that that's something that we might say, okay, here's a checkbox, you can hide the all users group and just not worry about it. But currently, no, there's no way to hide it. But like Rob said, a lot of people just simply don't use it at all.
People may use it mistakenly.
Oh, may use it mistakenly?
It happens.
Yeah.
We instruct our folks to immediately, when they set up the project, shut off all users. And then you add the AD groups underneath it, so you control it specifically, and you're not having that leak for somebody access.
That's a good, so the easiest way to remove the problem of the all users group being mistakenly used is go to your default project and make sure you strip all permissions off it completely. which will hide the project, but then any new project you create will start out with no permissions whatsoever. Yeah. That's how, yeah, that's a best practice right there. That's one we didn't mention. But one of the very first things you should do after you set up your Tableau server, go to the default project, strip off all the permissions, and then create a new project. Make sure there's no permissions on it, and then start from there.
Yeah, the default project ends up being used as a template for all future
Yeah.
projects that are created.
That's how we think ours.
Cool. So were there any of the best practices, was there any confusion about any of those? Were there anything that maybe we talked about it a little too fast and you wanted some clarification, or maybe how it might apply to you in your scenario? We'd be happy to talk about that. We want to make sure that, you know, you've got some value that you're leaving here with today. So. No? Oh, back here? Sure.
Actually, hang on, let me.
Yeah. Hold on. Yeah, that's the other thing. We definitely want to hear your stories. So if you have tips or best practices and you don't mind talking in front of a bit of a crowd, let us
So I'm
know.
a DBA and the Tableau Server admin, and my CTO, she always asks me, from a DBA perspective, if we want to clean up some tables or some objects in a database, she always wants to know how many workbooks are we going to affect that are published. So as a server admin, they're built in, there's no easy view into answering that question. So our solution was to export all of our workbooks and push it into a Git repository, and from there, you can do an easy search.
Yeah.
So for us, having a Git repository is a very easy way as a DBA to figure out what am I going to affect that's published on the server.
Yeah, no, that's a cool tip, actually. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If you need source control, or even if you're just, like you said, just trying to organize your workbooks and figure out their age and who's using what, yeah, use something like Git. You can script against our command line tool to export them, and then it's easy enough to use Git's command line tools to push them up to Git. And you can do that, if you want to automate, like let's say your backup, but then you also wanted to automate having those pushed out, you could have them in the same maintenance task. In this deck, there is an article from Information Lab linked. They are our premier partner in the UK, and it's called Tableau Housekeeping Made Easy. And they have a ready-made batch file that you can throw into Task Scheduler on your Windows server. All you need to do is customize it for your server and your paths, and it goes through and it does all the maintenance that you need to do for you. It's going to take a backup. It's going to clean up your log. It's going to zip up your log so that you have a rolling log file. Yeah. So it's an article from the Information Lab. It's a blog post, and it's called Tableau Server Housekeeping Made Easy. It's on one of our slides. And what it's going to do is there's a script in that article that you can customize for your environment, and it's going to do all of your housekeeping for you. All you have to do is throw it on Task Scheduler, and it's going to go through, it's going to clean up your it's going to zip up your log files, which is another best practice, like Blake mentioned, is collect your logs. Try to have a rolling 7-day period, because then that way, if one of your users say, hey, I had a workbook crash on me, last Tuesday, but if you don't have logs for that, support's not going to be able to help you. So keep a rolling log your zip logs. So that'll do that for you, and you can set the interval, you can set where that gets stored. It's going to clean up the log files so that after you've done that, it's going to freshen things up. But you could additionally, like the gentleman in the back said, if you want to add to that script, you could add something like a function where you export your workbooks to GitHub or some other source control or version control, or even just a file share. Maybe put them out on S3 just because you're like, oh, I don't know, maybe I should put those out there. That's up to you. I don't know what you're doing with them, so if that's something that makes sense to you, that's a great practice.
And with that, we are out of time. So Kevin and I want to say thank you, everybody, for coming and
you, everyone.
participating. And don't forget to fill out the survey on your way out. Tip your waitress, waiter, wait person. Thank you very much. Take care, y'all.